I'm having a hard time with this one, because it came out of left field. I'm currently renting an old small farmhouse on a few acres, along with my son and my 2 grandchildren, with whom I'm raising. I am very sensitive, so I know when there is anything negative around, and I have no idea what this was. When we first moved in, almost 3 years ago, my granddaughter was dancing in the bedroom as she wanted me to make a video. It was the sweetest thing, but the camera became fuzzy, so I told her to wait a while I fixed it. But of course she continued to laugh and dance to the music. I didn't find anything wrong, so as I aimed the camera back, I saw a very distinct orb dancing around with her. Shocked, I gasped and turned it off. Thinking that I'd caught it on video, I must have played it back 10 or so times. I couldn't find anything. A few months later I met a man who informed me that he had been raised in this house, and nothing bad had ever happened, and nobody had died here. Every once in a while one of us might see an orb, but there was nothing bad. Then there was a time after my sister's death, my son, his fiancée and my grandson saw something dark in my bedroom doorway, but it went away when it found it couldn't get into my room. That was in 2018. I tried to keep my house light and calm, wavering from anything negative just for this reason. I have a king-size bed that I share with my 2 grandchildren, and they have the option to sleep elsewhere, but they choose to sleep with me. For about a week my room has been cold, but I just thought it was because it was a bit cold outside, and it's an old house. But the night before last it was simply too cold for comfort. My mind wasn't on anything negative being there, and I didn't feel anything. I tucked the kids in as I do, Caden by my side so he doesn't wake up and roam, and Maddie on the other side. We were all so tired we just fell asleep right away. And this is where it got weird. Something woke me up. I felt cold pressure on my legs, and thinking it was one of my dogs, I sat up to move them, but none of them were in my room. I thought that it was odd, but I went back to sleep regardless. I was awakened again feeling like my foot was getting pulled, but once again nothing. At this point I made sure the kids were covered because despite the heater on full blast in my room, I could see my breath. Still not thinking there was anything paranormal going on, I turned over and wrapped myself with the blanket and fell back to sleep. Just then it felt like my whole body was being smothered and squeezed hard, almost like I was wrapped in an ice-cold weight blanket so tightly I couldn't move. When I opened my eyes I was gasping for air and the room was darker than usual, but I could still see everything and my blanket was loose. This went on a few more times. Getting poked awake or nudged from the side, the kids weren't on. By now I am so exhausted and annoyed. I got up and went to the bathroom, checked the heater and went back to sleep. Only this time I had a bad dream, almost like the ones I've had before. I was in my childhood temple, but it was bigger. People were there that had passed away years ago, but they would never directly look at me. It was like they were talking to me, but not at me. There was an event I was asked to participate in, and I was there with my grandson. There were people like Sunday school teachers that kept telling me that my grandson was okay in a different room with a different named person, when every time I asked where he was and if he was okay. Then things didn't seem right, and the people I thought I knew had changed and started to look away from me. Finally feeling worried that I hadn't seen my grandson, I started frantically looking for him, hearing someone say that he went outside with one of the boys. I could feel the fear pulse through my veins and my heart beating hard. The next thing I see is that I'm standing on a road and there is a crew of police cars with a search party looking in the woods, and I'm praying he is found. Then I wake up crying. I held my grandson tightly and went back to sleep. I couldn't have been sleeping long before a piercing scream in my ear woke me up and I shot out of bed. My whole body felt like I'd been hit by a Mack truck. I looked at the clock and I had only been in bed for 3 hours. The kids were still sound asleep, so I just got up and made some coffee. As I walked into the living room, all the dogs were in there, which is weird because they always sleep near me. All day I felt confused and I didn't understand what it was all about. Last night I cleansed my room and filled it with light and love, along with a string of blue Christmas lights, and the room stayed warm without the heater. Today I would cleanse my house more thoroughly. It was a carefree time when I was a little girl living in Hollywood, California. Doors were left unlocked, and the feeling that everyone watched out for your children was very prevalent. We didn't have computers, cell phones, or tablets, and if you wanted to talk to a friend, you'd call them on the corded house phone. And we mostly had 7 or 8 channels on our TV, brought in by antennas on the roof. Our street was quiet, with large trees that were great for climbing. I was a very sociable child, being the first to meet and greet the neighbours every time someone moved in. When I wasn't in school, I would make my way down the block every day to round up my friends so we could all play together. Every neighbourhood wouldn't be complete without a mom and pops living there. Mom's handing out baked goods to the kids, and Pops showing us tricks with coins and letting us visit his workshop from time to time. They had a son, but I don't remember seeing much of him. Time passed and things started to change. I'd noticed the old man would take walks like he usually would, but when he'd gotten to the round 6 houses down, his wife would walk to him and they would walk back home together. He had started staring at me too, while I was outside playing in my yard, and would motion for me to come over to him. When I did, he'd put his hand in his pocket and jingle his change, looking almost through me and whispering something I couldn't hear. Then his wife would come out and get him. We ended up moving from next door to across the street from their house, and he would just stand there watching me, only jingling his change when I'd look in his direction. One day his wife had ended up in the hospital, as I think the stress was just too much for her. That's when I'd see their son more often. He seemed like a sad young man, but I didn't know why. When Mums came home, my mother was instrumental in many ways in helping her out. On a few occasions, Pops was okay. He'd asked me to spend time with him, and we'd talk a lot and even made little things out of wood in his workshop in the back behind their house. I didn't see anything wrong with it. He was Pops and I was a very young child. He often gave me things too. A marble, a great pop top, a broken chain. But he made it seem like they were glorious things he was giving me. His son started watching us from the back porch when we were in there, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. One day I was in their house, as my mother had sent me over to give them something. She had baked for them, and while Mums was putting it in the kitchen, Pops pulled me aside and put this thing in my hand, telling me I'd earned it. Looking down, I saw that it was a purple heart. His purple heart. I told him no, I couldn't keep that, as it's far too important to him. Well, when Mums came around the corner, she took it from my hand, and with that he yelled out, "Hey, that's mine!" and tried to hit her. She told me to leave, so I ran home wondering whether I'd done something wrong, and told my mother. All she could say is, "That poor lady, what she has to go through." It was only later that I found out he used to physically abuse her quite often. He suffered from PTSD and took it out on her all the time. A few months later, I was crossing the street to visit my friend, and there he was. I hadn't seen him in a while, so I was pleasantly surprised. I ran up to him and gave him a hug, as I always did. But this time he grabbed both of my wrists, looked down into my eyes and said, "You have to know this." How he was acting completely startled me. He said, "I love you. I love you. Will you marry me?" I told him that I was just a little girl and that he should go home now. He then let go of my wrists and hugged me hard, then let go and put his hand in his pocket and started jingling his change. He then reached in his other pocket and handed me a beautiful diamond ring that was clearly too big for me. I told him that he should give this to his wife, and that's when he said that she didn't understand him. I then told him that it was way too expensive for a child to have, but he insisted that I take the ring and say yes, assuring me it was fake, so it was okay, and he was not about to back down. So I took it home. A few days later, thinking that it wasn't such a big deal, I showed my mother the ring, and upon inspection she said that it was real and that it had to be returned. We came to find out that it was his wife's wedding ring that she had left on the sink and had been looking for it for weeks. Later that month there was all kinds of commotion. Ambulances and fire trucks swarmed in the street in front of their house, and the old man we called Pops had shot himself in the head in their living room, leaving his son to clean his father's brain matter off of the wall. The neighborhood was never the same, and we moved shortly after. Every small town has their own little urban legends, silly rumours spread by word of mouth among teenage school kids. We've all heard them, maybe even tried them out once, not really believing in them, but thinking how cool it would be if it were actually true, and pretending to be scared all the same. Usually people grow out of them when harsher realities of life set in, and there's a lot more to worry about than the creepy old lady in the last toilet stall on the left, or repeating a name in front of a mirror 3 times at midnight. Well, I'm ashamed to admit, I didn't grow out of it when I thought at the time was a harsh reality hit me. I stupidly relied on an urban legend to help me out of it, and I may have paid a very dear price. I'll be brief in telling you why I did it. I saw a young girl come out of my boyfriend's apartment one morning as I was walking to work. I'm 32 years old now, by the way. At the time I was only 22, so as you can imagine I was livid with grief. I had to know who she was before I confronted him, had to get as much evidence as I could. Then I remembered a rumour that went around in high school. It went like this: if you want to know the answer to a question you have, any question, you go to a phone booth, then dial your own mobile number. Soon afterwards you get a call from someone called Tiny Tim. This person will tell you the answer to your question. I know, right? But bear with me. So being at a loss as to what to do, I made my way to a phone box just outside the corner shop a few blocks from my house. I put my coin in and dialed my own number. I let it ring a few times. Then in a flash of embarrassment at myself, I hung up the receiver and walked back home, feeling like an idiot, betrayed and helpless. About an hour after that, I got a call from my boyfriend. He asked why he hadn't heard from me all day. I usually messaged him every morning with a good morning message, so I told him it was because I thought he seemed busy. He then told me his younger sister had come to stay with him for a few nights during her university's summer holiday. To his credit, he did actually tell me several times of the existence of a younger sister studying finance in Liverpool. I came clean and told him what I'd seen, and we had a laugh about it. I even told him about my call to Tiny Tim. I remember him saying, "No, that's not it. You call him, then he comes to your house and gives you the answer in person." Whatever, I thought. Then he added, "Plus you have to give him some sort of payment. Not money or anything. I don't remember, but some payment is needed before he tells you. But hey, you don't even need to know the answer now, so little Timmy is going to be pissed." We chatted for a little while longer, then said goodbye. I didn't give it another thought until about an hour later I got a phone call from a hidden number. When I picked up, all I heard was a child's voice. A boy. He sounded happy too, as if he knew me. He said, "This is Tiny Tim. I'm getting on the train at Springwood Station." Then it went dead. I called my boyfriend to congratulate him on his lame phone call, but he denied ever doing so. It had to have been him, I thought. When I got out of the shower soon after that call, my phone alerted me to a missed call. The caller had left a message. "This is Tiny Tim. I'm at Liverpool Station." That was my station. Now I felt genuinely creeped out. Is this someone's sick joke? 10 or 15 minutes later I got another call from an unknown number. I was hesitant to pick it up, but it could have been my parents trying to call, so I answered it. "This is Tiny Tim. I'm at the corner shop." Now I can tell you I started to panic. I locked the front door, all the windows, then went around the entire house turning all the lights on. Then I waited, and I remember thinking, "Please don't call, please don't call, please don't call." But my phone sprang to life in my hand. Unknown number again. "This is Tiny Tim. I'm at the front of your house." I crept to the front door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. Then I opened the door, just a crack, and peered out. Just the empty stairs. I shut the door, but before I could turn around the phone rang again. I didn't answer it this time. I didn't have to. From somewhere behind me an ice-cold breeze blew, even though all the windows and doors were shut and locked. Then I heard a voice, the same voice that was on the phone. "I'm Tiny Tim. You don't need an answer, but you still need to pay me." I didn't turn around. I was frozen with fear. Then there was the sound of breathing. It was raspy and phlegmy. The only other time I heard this type of breathing was when my uncle was in hospital with lung cancer. I just couldn't turn around. I couldn't do anything. A small white hand, then an arm curled around my waist from behind. It stopped on my belly, where it slowly started to rub it, to almost caress it. I screamed, then I bolted out of the house and didn't stop running until I reached my boyfriend's flat. He didn't believe me, of course. He thought I was on drugs. I didn't return home until after my parents had returned 2 days later. Luckily, no one had broken in, seeing as though the front door was probably unlocked the whole time. As I said before, at the time of writing this, I am 32 years old. I'm married now to a different guy, and we have been trying to have a baby for the last 2 years. Yesterday we visited the gynecologist. She informed me that I was sterile and could never hope to conceive naturally. We are both devastated. I can hear it coming down the stairs very slowly, and it stops every so often and listens, then starts its journey down again. If I stop typing and hold my breath, I can almost hear it breathing. I've tried to write this story before in different rooms of the house, but it finds me each time. I'm never going there again. To Japan. Not after what they did. Or rather what they made me do. They being my now ex-girlfriend, her mother and her sister. I had planned to stay for the entirety of my working holiday visa, which was 18 months, but I ended up staying for only 2 weeks before fleeing back to England in despair. Feeling betrayed and terrified, also being used in the most horrible and degrading way, I take some consolation in the fact that I never really had any power over it, and that I was unaware of the purpose of what I was made to do, and that there was no way I could have ever connected the dots to lead me to the atrocity that I was an integral part of 7 months ago. An atrocity that I sometimes feel has followed me back here, because I can sometimes hear it at night when it's very quiet, like right now. The physical time I first met Mayo was when she was an exchange student at Lancaster University, the university I also attended. She was studying English for a year and living on campus. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party and started seeing more of each other over the preceding weeks. About 2 months after we'd first met, we were a couple. I sometimes wonder if things would have turned out differently had I never gone to that party, but what struck me about her was the uncanny ability to read people. Mayo was also capable of holding very long and deep conversations. She often asked me questions about what I was like as a child, how my parents treated men, and was I happy. It sometimes felt like an interview or an interrogation, like she was screening people. Now, in terrifying retrospect, I know that in a way she was doing just that. Mayo extended her student visa by another 6 months, then returned to Tottori City on the Sea of Japan coast. After a year and 3 months, it would be the first time we would be apart. The loss was unbearable, but we promised to Skype each other as much as possible. Not long after she left, about 3 months I think, she called me on Skype and told me about the working holiday program that was available to UK citizens. If awarded, the applicant could spend an entire year in the country, living and working. I looked into her suggestion, checked the application criteria, and about 2 weeks after applying, I was booking tickets to Japan. We were ecstatic. I, because of the prospect of being able to spend a whole year together, and maybe longer, became a reality, and Mayo, because, well, that will become apparent later. I spent the first 2 weeks living with Mayo, her mother and older sister. I was told their father had died when they were all young. It was cramped and I felt a little intrusive being the only male in the house, but we were together and happy. Her mother and sister would often go out together, sometimes not returning home for a couple of days. When asked where they went, the answer was always the same: visiting relatives. Apart from these frequent trips, I hadn't heard a thing about any of her relatives, nor did I see any photos around the house. One night after they had returned home very late, around 1 a.m. I think it was, I heard them all talking at the table in the kitchen downstairs. I couldn't make out what was being said, and my Japanese wasn't nearly good enough to have understood anyway. I do recall Mayo asking incessantly, "Are you sure?" That much I understood. We all went to a barbecue restaurant for dinner the following night. I was left home alone that day while the 4 of them visited an aunt, who was apparently sick. They took me out to dinner as a way of thanking me for my house-sitting. We were all drinking and the mood was jovial. After we'd eaten and the table had been cleared, Her older sister produced several pamphlets from her handbag and arranged them on the table in front of me. They were from a local real estate company, advertising apartments for rent in the city. We all browsed the catalogues. There weren't really any suitable places, though. They were either too expensive, too isolated from the city centre, or too old. Then Mayo's mother took out another pamphlet from her bag. It wasn't like the glossy ones her sister had showed me. This was printed in black and white from a photocopier and only advertised a few rooms. One of them was circled in red. A small one-room apartment with a kitchenette and unit bath. Good location, 4th floor. The price was a little too out of my budget, however. Then, in an act of extreme kindness, she offered to pay the rent until I found a job and could pay it all by myself. Well, I was overjoyed and a little guilty for allowing this old lady to help me out with the rent for a few months. I truly thought she was a most compassionate lady. This, of course, would turn out to be wrong and in the worst possible way. I can smell it now, sitting at my desk while typing this. Incense. The type burned in Shinto shrines and at rituals, wafting down the stairs. It's said to have a soothing effect, but for me, it's quite the opposite. The outside building was a dilapidated mess. It stood 4 stories high with 3 rooms on each level. Many of the rooms appeared to be vacant. Some even had boarded up windows or old yellowing newspapers stuck to them. What I assume was once the lobby in the 1970s was now a dark and uninviting space, floored by carpeting which was probably once orange but was now reduced to a swamp green tinge. The building caretaker, in name only as evidence would suggest, met us at the lobby. He was a stocky bald man of about 70, and he wore sunglasses and a bathrobe. He reeked of old sweat and cigarettes. He was a perfect fit for the building, old, worn out, with a greasy layer of sleaze that was more felt than seen. There was something unsettling in the way he regarded me with what can only be called pity. He sighed as he handed Mayo's mother the key to the room, along with a spare. It was obvious they had met before under a similar exchange. The interior of the room was surprisingly modern. The flooring had been replaced, a new kitchenette fitted, and the bathroom fully renovated as well. I had learned that the wallpaper had also been replaced. The furniture was also all new looking, like it had hardly been used at all. My things were all able to fit into Mayo's sister's car, the suitcase I came to the country with containing all my clothes, a laptop and other personal effects, and a futon mattress given to me by her mother. As the 3 of them were leaving, Mayo's sister jabbed her mother with her elbow and gave her a look. Suddenly reminded of something, her mother said, "Oh, that's right, I almost forgot. Here." She pulled out a wooden plaque about 15 centimeters long and 5 wide. It was bordered with white paper which was secured by some red string which ran across it breadthwise at 3 equidistant points. On the plaque itself was a jumble of Chinese characters, completely indecipherable to me. Running down the middle, 4 large characters were written in dark red ink. It was an ofuda, she said. These are acquired from shrines and are personally inscribed by the shrine's head priest with an incantation. This one, she said, was a protective charm for a new house. I was instructed by her mother to place it on the south wall as high as possible. She insisted that I do it there and then. Using a tool, I did what she requested. Ai and her sister looked toward their mother, who was scrutinizing the position of the plaque. She looked at the floor, then to a spot on the roof, then to another spot on the opposite wall, as if she were tracing something in her mind. She shook her head slowly and moved the stool over, a few feet to the left, toward the corner of the room. She then readjusted the position of the plaque. "There, much better," she said with obvious relief. I never asked why she moved it, but I would find out soon enough. And with that, the 2 of them left. At this point, I would like to make it very clear that what follows is as accurate as an account as I can put into words. Some things, of course, were harder to put into words than others, but I will let you decide which those things are. The smell of the incense is getting much stronger now, and there is something else. The air around me feels tight, compressed. The noises will start next, I'm sure. After I had unpacked, I went out to get some dinner from the convenience store a few blocks away. It was only upon leaving the room that I realized Mayo's mother never gave me the spare key, so I messaged Mayo to confirm this. I was only out of the room for about 15 minutes. but when I returned there was something out of place. It was subtle but definitely noticeable. It was a smell of incense, and there was a small bowl of something light brown and powdery in the corner of the room closest to the entranceway. This was where the smell was coming from. The bowl was halfway full of ash from an incense censer, or perhaps incense had been burning in this bowl. Either way, I couldn't be 100% sure that it wasn't there when I had first entered the room, but was fairly certain it wasn't. I don't recall smelling any incense then, although it is possible that the small bowl went unnoticed amidst the furniture cluttering the room. This is what I told myself at the time, anyway. I picked it up and dumped the ash in the sink, then put the bowl on the sink counter. It had turned 11 p.m, and Mayo still hadn't replied. This was strange, as she would always reply within minutes of my sending a message, regardless of the time, but I was exhausted after the effort of moving, so I tried to sleep. That's when the noises started. I woke up at about 1 a.m. to a strange sound. At first I contributed it to being on the top floor of the building, and so underneath water towers, pipes and the like that would be making all the normal noises of an apartment building in the dead of night. The rooms on either side were empty as far as I knew, and I was the only resident on this floor, so I could dismiss the explanation it could be one of my neighbours. No, the sound came from somewhere within my room. Every few minutes or so I would hear it. There was no direction to it, like a sound in your head. It's just there. My apologies for this outlandish description, but it's the best way I can convey the sound as accurately as possible. I remember seeing a video online of a horse licking peanut butter off the roof of its mouth. Its teeth clacked together as its jaws snapped shut, trying to get the peanut butter off. It was a sound exactly like this clacking of teeth. Large, blunt, with a wet echo. Clack, clack, clack. Then a few minutes would pass, and another clack. I got up and went about the room trying to pinpoint the source of the noise. Appliances seemed to be working fine. The pipe in the kitchen and bathroom were running fine too. Too exhausted to care anymore, I eventually fell into a restless sleep. The world beyond my closed eyelids, however, was very much awake. I dreamt that I awoke a short time later to the same noise. It must have been a dream, because this time there was a small indistinct figure standing at the foot of my futon. I woke up from the previous night's unrestful sleep to find that Mayo still hadn't replied. I tried calling, but the connection was dead. I decided after going grocery shopping I would go to their house to get my spare key. I decided to take the small bowl that contained the ash to the caretaker. Perhaps it belonged to a previous tenant and went unnoticed. Maybe it was the caretaker's, put there to take away the smell. In any case, I didn't need it. No one answered the door to the caretaker's room, so I left the bowl and a note, explaining its appearance. I returned about half an hour later from my shopping trip, and took a detour past the caretaker's room. The bowl was now gone. It's definitely here now. It knows I'm writing about it. I can hear the clack clack clacking from behind me, but I know better than to turn around. Sometimes it appears to me as it did in the dream. Other times it appears as it did in the room the day I fled. It doesn't matter which. I will not turn around. Later that day I took the quick train trip to Mayo's house. It was only 2 stations, but it was an anxious trip. Her mother wasn't responding to texts or calls either. It wasn't turned off, it would just ring out. When I reached the house, the steel brown shutters on all the windows were shut, the car was gone, and the post slot in the front door was sealed with silver duct tape. My heart sank. There was no one in the house. I tried to call her mother several more times on the way back from the station, but without luck. I remember traipsing up the stairs to the 4th floor and pressing the redial button in a vain hope that she'd pick up, but nothing. On one of the floors above, a mobile phone rang incessantly, as if to mock me. It echoed down the concrete stairwell, and it made me feel ill. It was still raining, and I noticed them as soon as I opened the door and turned on the light. Footprints, dried and scattered about the entranceway. I did a frantic inventory of my possessions, not that there was anything worth stealing, but nothing was missing. Then I noticed there was a strange black chalky substance on the ground at the foot of my bed. Charcoal. I wiped it away with my foot. If I had lifted up the futon and seen what was on the floor underneath, I probably would not have even stayed one more night. I say one more night because this was the last night I'd spend in that room, and consequently the last night I'd be in Japan. I needed a drink that night. There was about a third of a bottle of wild turkey I had under the sink, so I poured a generous splash into a clean glass. I noticed a strange taste to it after the first sip. It tasted spicy. After the second sip, my head felt too heavy to be supported by my neck, and I was sprawled on the floor on the futon before I could have a third. The temperature had suddenly dropped and the clock on the wall had stopped ticking. It had no reason to stop ticking. I awoke to a dark room, save for some weak moonlight creeping in from the window, and I was completely paralyzed. Only my senses worked. I could move my eyes, but I couldn't talk. There was a smell too. Incense. The same as I'd smelled that day when I found the bowl. The same as I can smell now. And there was another smell too. It smelled like a wet animal, damp fur, musty and mouldy like rotten earth exhumed. There's a part of me, the rational part of me, which even now tries to convince myself that it was all a nightmare visage while under the spell of sleep paralysis, that cannot explain what is watching me from the darkness of the hallway behind me. There was also another sensation that I'd started to become conscious of, a sensation below my waist, around my genital area. This area was definitely not paralyzed. I was terribly aware of that. And there was a primitive cadence being played on what sounded like chimes and bells, all backed by the slow rhythmic beating of a fish drum, which is a small drum used in Shinto services. But I couldn't see the origin of their players. Then something started to come out of the murk of the room just beyond my feet. Something stark white at first, but as it moved closer was revealed to have something dark red and glistening smeared up its belly from between its legs. The figure was female, wrinkled with deflated breasts that were pinned to a skin and bone ribcage. It mounted me. The viscous red ooze smeared up its stomach, still wet, made a squishing sound against my own nakedness. It smelled coppery, rusty. The figure now straddling me was close enough to make out facial features, and it was inexplicably Mayo's mother. Her head had been shaved. From the center of her wide forehead down to her chin was a large red-black handprint. It too glistened in the silvery murk. In rhythm with the primal orchestra of the drums and percussive bells came an incomprehensible incantation. I didn't recognize the language at all. There were two distinct voices, and one of them was Maya's. Her mother drank from a small bowl. It looked like the one I had found earlier. What she drank left a yellowy-green residue on her upper lip. The incantations continued until they reached a crescendo, then suddenly halted, and Mayo's mother stopped moving too. She bowed her head as if in silent prayer, her arms flopping listlessly to her sides. It was suddenly silent, vacuously silent. Not even the usual ambient sounds of the building or of outside. The room and the reality around me froze. Then came a sound which started somewhere inside the mother's body. A low, guttural groan, which started from her gut and slowly made its way up her throat, where it seemed to stop. It sounded like she was trying to vomit or something. This sound went on for too long. Then the sound stopped and it was dead silent again. Maya's mother's head was still down to her chest, but shoulders heaved with the motions of heavy breathing, and somewhere behind me the drum started beating again. It sounded louder than before, closer. It resonated through everything, and the air appeared to ripple. Then the ceiling started to move towards me. Her mother was a dead weight on my hips, but she too rose with me effortlessly. Her pale chicken skin legs dangled in the air on either side of my body. A bright flash filled the room like lightning, accompanied by a soul-splitting rumble, like being at the epicenter of a bomb blast. All sensations ceased with this, and the air around me became very tight. The light faded, and I now found myself looking down on something. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. It was as if I was watching myself, but through somebody else. I could see myself on the floor of my apartment, the room moonlit. I was alone and completely naked. On the space of the floor that I was lying on was a large black symbol. It looked like it had been scrawled in black chalk or charcoal. At different points on the circle's circumference were Chinese characters set like compass points, The way my body had been arranged, been abused, it's difficult to write about. I'll try to be as matter-of-fact as possible. My left arm was positioned at a point straight to the left of the circle. My hand came to rest above the character written at the point. The middle and ring fingers on my left hand were tied together with thin red string. My right arm was positioned diagonally downward to the right, pointing at another of the characters. The index and thumb of this hand were stuck together in a similar fashion. My groin area was caked with something slick and red. This had to be blood. It was not my own. And my genitals, also covered in blood, had viscous clots of dark red and jelly pasted to it. My legs were extended and tied together with a thicker red string at the ankles and at the knees. I stayed above this scene, just observing it, and felt nothing at all. Then there was a second explosive flash of light, and the scene changed to pitch black. I had the impression I was standing. I don't know why, but I sensed I was upright. Slowly, two faintly glowing orange lights appeared on either side of me. The lights seemed to be covered by something, like a lantern, the kind you would see at the entrance to a shrine. They seemed to get brighter. Then I heard the sound again, the clack-clack-clacking of large teeth. It was getting closer, and I could feel it was coming from a point between the glowing lights. I could smell it, like a wet animal, the same stench as that night in my apartment. Then a form came towards me from the blackness beyond the soft illumination of the lights. It appeared to glide or float. I say float because I could see its feet. They hung limp, bony, emancipated toes pointing down. The body, if you could call it a body, was a skeleton with skin, except for its gut, which protruded outward in a sickening pregnant bulge. It had no parts with which to determine its gender, and it had no hair either. Its face was a skull covered in a thin chalky white skin. Its eyes looked human. They lacked the lifelessness of the rest of the body. They regarded me with a mute expression of triumph, and they seemed to gloat, but it was the mouth. I finally had an image with which to attach the sound. Inside a lipless mouth were 2 rows of yellowy teeth, set inside blackened gums. They were too big for its mouth, and they were all the same size, like cow's teeth. They were clacking together as the jaw moved open, shut, open, shut, open, shut, in quick succession. Its approach stopped when it came within a foot of where I was. Then its countenance changed. Its eyes turned hard, hateful. I felt an overwhelming sense of being menaced. Its teeth clenched mercifully. This image ceased when something that felt like an open hand struck me directly in the face from nowhere. Everything turned to pitch black again, and I woke up. I was lying on the cold floor. I had a splitting headache and my vision was impaired, but I could see that the clothes I was wearing were not the same as the ones I had on when I passed out. At first I thought I was in a different room, because the room I woke up in was empty. It was definitely my apartment though, but it had been emptied of everything except some garbage bags and empty bottles of bleach strewn about the floor. Also, my suitcase and backpack appeared to have been packed and were set against the bathroom door. The floor had streaks of something all over it, like it had been cleaned not long ago. The previous night's events started to bleed back into horrific clarity. I checked my whole body for wounds or any physical evidence of what had happened. Just red indentations of several of my fingers, and also down my legs where something had been tied. The unmistakable smell of bleach made me dry heave, and I fell to my knees. I dry heaved again when I saw the garbage bag filled with paper towels, all of which were coloured different shades of red. Some were black. My wallet was untouched, so was my passport, but my phone was nowhere to be found. I didn't care. I had to leave that room. But on the way out I stopped dead. I heard something behind which rendered me frozen with fear and panic. Clack. Then a gust of freezing cold wind hit my back, maybe from the window, and I don't know what the primal impulse compelled me to turn around, but turn around I did. I was not expecting to see what I saw either. There, in the middle of the room, where I had been lying just seconds before, was a middle-aged woman sitting on a simple wooden chair. There was nothing unordinary about her at all, apart from the fact that she suddenly manifested in my empty room. I mean, her appearance was otherwise no different from any other middle-aged woman in the country. She was wearing a simple loose-fitting one-piece dress, printed with a floral design. She was sitting straight, hands folded in her lap, smiling warmly at me. We faced each other for what seemed like a long time. She didn't blink. Her face remained fixed in a smile, like a wax museum doll. I had to get away from that woman, whoever she was, whatever she was. I started to back away towards the door, hand clasped firmly around the handle of my suitcase. I took 1, maybe 2 steps back, and she sprang up off the seat as if she were violently pulled from above. Her face had changed too. It was now alive. The eyes bulged too far from their sockets. There was a threatening recognition in them. Her lips curled back in a grimace to reveal those teeth. She bit at the air, jaws snapping open and shut too quickly for any human. Then, with all the likeness of a marionette doll being controlled by an unseen puppeteer, she began to lope toward me, teeth still chattering, eyes ablaze. I turned and bolted out the door, and from behind me, over the top of the god-awful chattering of teeth, came a booming laugh. It was male, bestial, and mocking. It followed me down the stairs, through the lobby, and out of the front door of the building. I hailed the first taxi I could find, and my pulse didn't slow down until I had reached Heathrow Airport, London. There. It's finished, but it's still behind me. As long as I don't turn around, it might give up and return to whatever hell it came from. Weirdly enough, I've grown tolerant of the noises, but I don't ever want to see it again. Seeing it in nightmares is bad enough. I haven't returned to my studies, which means I have forfeited this semester and will have to repeat it next year, if I go back at all. I've been spending all of my time in fervent research. Shinto is an ancient spirituality, and although there is little to no mention of the occult side of it, there must be secrets long buried since eons past that could shine some faint light on what happened to me. 3 main questions continued to fester in my mind. Who or what was the skeleton-like creature I encountered with the bloated gut and clacking teeth? Who were the members of Mayo's family? Who was Mayo, for that matter? And perhaps most perplexing, why me? Why go to all the effort and planning for me? Answers to these questions, or clues to them, may help me find a way to be rid of this thing. I sincerely thank you all for reading my story to the end, and hope somebody can aid me